Hello and welcome to the studio this morning. Today we are going to be sewing up one of the arcs for block 1 of the Almond Country Beauty block of the month. So this video lesson is all about foundation paper piecing a basic New York Beauty block. So the supplies that you're going to need for that are your arc. I've printed mine on Carol Doak's foundation paper piecing paper, so it's nice and thin. You can see through it really well. And it's also going to tear away easily because it's so thin. You can get that paper anywhere, including our website. If you don't have it and you don't want to get it, regular copy paper will work. It's just thicker, harder to see through, and harder to tear away. So print off your arc. You're going to need to cut out your points and your background fabrics, and that information is of course in your pattern. You'll need a pair of scissors, and optionally you can use a little ruler to help gauge your seam allowances. Okay, so let's get started on this. When you are foundation paper piecing, you're always sewing your fabric onto the wrong side of the paper so that you can clearly see the lines, and those are what you're going to sew on. Also on this pattern, the odd numbers are the backgrounds and the even numbers are the points. Okay, so we're going to get our first piece of background fabric, position that. I like to sort of line it up right on that line just to get an idea of where things are, and then slide it over 1/4 of an inch. Now you can hopefully see that, yes, through the light there, through the paper. You can see that we're over this seam line, and we're also over the seam allowance lines on both sides of that. And then we are going to get our first point fabric, and that is going to be positioned directly on top of the piece that's already there. Now you can pin this in place or just hold it tight and flip it over. Slide it into the machine here, and you are going to sew right on the line between pieces 1 and piece 2. Now I have shortened up my stitch length on my machine. That's a 2, but a nice short stitch length will do 2 things for you. Number 1, it's going to make a lot more perforations here, which will make it a lot easier to tear this paper away when that time comes. And also, if you noticed, I didn't back stitch on either end, so a shorter stitch length will help make that just a little bit more secure. Okay, so we are going to open our fabric up here. I'm going to finger press this here today, but if you have your ironing board and iron nearby, that's actually a better choice because you'll get a nice flatter situation here. And also, if you are using your iron, you might want to put a pressing cloth underneath, not underneath, but right on top of your ironing board, because sometimes this toner, depending on your machine and the quality of things that are going on there, this can come off with heat. So I like to just lay a big ugly scrap that I don't really care about on top of my ironing surface, so that if this toner does come off, it comes off on that scrap. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 ways to get your seam allowance. So the first way, which is very precise, is to fold this paper back right along that next seam line. And you can sort of finger press that there, get a little ruler, line it up so that you've got your 1/4 inch line on that fold, and then mark this. I'm going to use a hair marker here, but you could use a pencil, or if you have a little rotary cutting set up, you could just have that nearby, and then trim right along that line. So that is one way to do it. Now, when we flip this back over, you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Everything's perfect there. You know exactly where to put everything. We're going to take our next background piece. We're going to line it up right across that line. We are over on this seam allowance and a little under there, so let's back that up a little bit and get that nice and right. Okay, fold that tight, flip it over, and now we're going to sew on the line between 2 and 3. right, now open that up, press it. Okay, so now I showed you there how to get that seam allowance just so. Now I'm going to show you the way that I actually do it, which takes a lot less time. If you love precision, that marking situation is great. If you are more confident and a little more loose, try this technique. So I'm going to take this point fabric and I'm going to lay it. Can you see the line? I can see the line, so hopefully you can. I'm going to lay it right along that line, and then I'm going to slip it over 1/4 of an inch. Make sure that I have enough at the top and the bottom. Flip it over, and sew on the line between 3 and 4. Okay. So now I'm just going to come in here and trim this off. Now, another little thing about this, if you have a very light background, like a solid white or a white print, you really are going to want to trim your point fabric to be more narrow than your background fabric so that nothing shadows through. So in my case, it's not going to shadow through because I've got a gray, but how I just trimmed that in 2 separate pieces, leaving the gray a little bit longer, is exactly what you'd want to do if you are worried about shadowing. Okay, so open and press here. Now we're back to another background. You can see that we have plenty of fabric out here for our seam allowance. I'm going to go with my same old way of lining that up along the line and then scooting it over 1/4 of an inch, making sure that the top and bottom are right as rain. Slide that in. Okay, and if you are not worried about shadowing like me, you can just trim this all flush in one big swoop. Open and press. Okay, I think you have the idea here, but I'm just going to time-lapse this video and speed it up a little bit so that you can see the rest of the process. Okay, so now we've pieced the entire little arc. Now you're just going to take this to your cutting board or carefully with a pair of scissors, and you're going to trim. The heavy line is the sewing line, the light line is your cutting line. So you're going to trim this up flush and then remove the paper. Some people like to leave the paper in until the whole block is together. Some people like to leave the paper in until the whole quilt is together. I like to make a block and get rid of that paper. It's just one more thing in the way, so I get rid of mine right away, but you do whatever you like. And this basic technique is how you're going to piece all of the inner arcs and then the outer arcs for blocks 1, 3, and 7. So I hope that was helpful.